You ready, Mr. Manager?
I'm ready, sir. I have just a couple of minutes to give you an opening comment here, and then I'm going to sit down and we'll listen. But since I started this with a preamble of what the budget would be like, I thought I'd finish it with just some final statements. And we have a diversity of electeds up here. We have some people in their first year and some people who are well tenured. So just to remind you that the scope of the budget here, or what we're trying to get done, is to provide the best we can for citizens with a finite resource available. As mentioned when we started, how we set this budget defines this organization. It reaffirms to our community what we're all about, and how we decide core services such as public safety and public services to citizens, many of whom can't afford to pay for services, for fundamental needs, how we wrangle a challenging and constantly aging infrastructure, and how we care for our internal organization, that's our employees and our operations, will dictate how we stand as a county. I mentioned when we started last week, we have pre-existing stresses on local government, some of them foisted on us by the state, some of them self-imposed. We have an existing commitment to the Sedgwick County Zoo, which you all voted for back in January, that we've built in, and we have new stresses for the 2020 budget year. As you have heard, we have rising demand in all arenas of public safety. That's everything from the sheriff and 911, reduced state funding to corrections. The DA's office has challenges. The courts have challenges. We have a shared responsibility for behavioral health in this community, and there's clearly a need there, as was presented. We have an aging population. There's clearly needs there. We have challenges in our physical infrastructure, as David has talked about, our maintaining our county roads, particularly our cold mix roads, and our continuing drainage challenges, which we talked about. We also have a history of an inadequate employee compensation pool that is not competitive in the market right now. We have rising health care costs, and Sheena will talk more in the weeds on this subject tomorrow during our workshop. We have an effort, we need an effort to reel in rising technology costs, and coupled with an aging technology system that we are trying to tackle through our technology review board, which you heard about. And as Wes talked about, there's two components to that. Safety of the system is job one, and then efficiency for the work processes is job two. So where we sit today, and as we start this final wrap-up discussion, the departmental budgets that you heard did not include employee compensation and healthcare adjustments. You heard departments get up and say that they were 2% and 3% and 4% below. It's because we haven't factored in employee compensation and healthcare into those numbers. The forecasts that you have included, including the long sheet, have factored those in. Our forecast for the 2020 budget year right now, today, as we said, includes about a $1.36 million general fund operating deficit. There is $5.5 million or so in decision package requests out there, some in the forecast, most not, that we will have to factor in if we decide to add. We have two components that reduce our flexibility as a local government. One is the state tax lid. If we want to address that, we would have to do that legislatively through your legislative platform next year. And I'm not talking about a kick out of it. I'm talking about there are certain reasonable modifications we could ask for, which would help us as a county entity trying to do a budget. And then we have a county-imposed mill levy cap rate, which was adopted in 2016, which also has a 2023 mill levy reduction, which you do have control over. If we want to change or talk about that, it would require a resolution modification or a resolution amendment if we want to discuss those types of changes. And if you want to know the ramifications of that, I think we're ready between Lindsay and Lorian to talk about what that would mean as far as funding and money, if you want to go there and discuss that. In the future, after we convene today or after we are finished, we will give you a few days. And then Lindsay and Lorian and I will walk the halls and talk with you about what you thought of this process and what you want to emphasize or discuss. And then you'll get another chance after that meeting where we will have you come to the finance conference room, and we will have some slides for you to look at and some interactive kinds of budgeting tools we can use, and discuss other priorities that you may want to include, all before the June 19th manager and staff budget comes to you in a printed form. So that's kind of the future. And at this point, I think we open it up for discussion.
We have questions from the commission? I guess I'll start it off. We need to talk about compensation. We're going to do that today yet? Tomorrow?
We have a workshop tomorrow dedicated just to that.
We have 2 hours dedicated for that tomorrow.
Okay.
And then
Well,
health insurance a couple weeks later.
I'll hold my questions until we go through tomorrow then. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we still got to address, to figure out where we're going to be. And that $1.3 million deficit that we're looking at right now, that's with pay raise or without? That's with a 3.5. Okay. And what kind of pay raise, and we can ask all these questions tomorrow, but one of the questions I'll ask is what kind of pay raise would it take? Because I understand that 3.5 won't even bring us back up to where we need to be. What kind of pay raise would it take to get us where we need to be?
Sheena will get into that tomorrow, and actually we're not even going to present it as a 1-year solution. We're going to look at it as a 5-year solution, and Sheena will go through those numbers with many different scenarios tomorrow.
Okay, very good. Questions from the commissioner?
I've got one. So the 1.3 million deficit, is that on this sheet? Is it line 47?
39.
39. So it's the beginning balance there on 2020 or whatever?
So
The general fund, 1.359?
that row 48 is the beginning balance, but then that row 39 reflects what we expect the operating income to be in a year. So we expect revenues to exceed expenses or not. And so when Tom talks about the $1.3 million deficit, we primarily focus on the general fund. Those other funds have a targeted drawdown that we're trying to do, which is why you see so much red below that. And so that 1.359 million is the deficit in the general fund based on all of these assumptions you see at the top
For the 2020.
for 2020 fiscal year.
Okay.
And again, deficit is not always bad, and we'll have that discussion with you about what is acceptable deficit, depending on what the circumstances are that drive that as we move through this process and see what Tom's recommended budget will look like for you.
Why does it go back in the black? Why does it go in the black the next 3 years?
We have
Yes.
increasing assessed value that offsets some of those one-time
Okay.
costs that we have, and those vary as well.
You've got the assessed of 3.75.
Don't worry, I'm sure we'll find ways to spend it, or you all will. Any of that black balance.
Okay.
Okay.
So I see also then line 29 is the infamous technical review board impact, right?
It's actually famous. It's not infamous.
Ah.
But
Famous.
Both.
So is it, so if we did the 2.6 million for 2020, then it's still another $1.2 million next year, and then does it level off, you think, at 600,000, 650?
I think right now what we've heard is that Wes's team is continuing to put together what those outer years look like.
Okay.
And so this is probably a fairly incomplete picture at this point.
And that still is, even the 2.6 is a little bit of a loose number in my mind, because we're still going through budget to
Well,
find out, as Commissioner Cruz brought up
Right.
this morning, there's still pockets in the organization that we'll be trying to find funding.
Okay. What do you want us to ask?
I don't know if I.
Is there a hot button?
The only, what I'd like,
I don't know, is
what I'd like to walk away with today, and be thinking about what you heard and what you feel is important for your vision for the county to ask for. But we need some type of, if you don't want to do anything with the mill levy cap, the self-imposed county mill levy cap, we will work this budget and make it work. But if you want to engage that, I think we would need a decision if you want to amend that by middle of.
The action would need to be taken by June.
Remembering that that's going to require a formal commission action, so we'd have to get it in front of you in an open meeting, and I can count between now and manager's budget time, we're down to 3 or 4 meetings, so we would need to schedule that and calendar that if you want to discuss that. So if there's no interest in discussing that, we'll move on and we'll plow, but if you have interest in that, if you see needs that we're going to have to address that are important enough that you would want to maybe adjust that, I'd like to know if you were interested in having that discussion.
So just so that I'm clear, in 2016, the previous commission put a cap. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Can you just explain that one more time and why it was done? Maybe the commissioners that were here is there a reason for that?
I'll explain it. You want to start? I'll add my.
What do we let Lindsay start, Commissioner, and you can.
Okay.
So I'll talk to the technicals, and then he can maybe talk about the why. So in 2016, a commission took action to reduce the mill levy rate target for forecasting and for budgeting to what was the 2010 tax rate to support the 2011 budget, and that rate was 29.359 mils. And so if you look at your long sheet, you'll see that rate going across in row 66, what we're planning for. And so every year, though, we base a budget on estimated value in June, but then that rate gets technically adjusted by the time value's really set in November, because when you adopt a budget, we're really focused on the dollars it takes to support that budget.
Is this being recorded? Can
As
I
far
look?
as I know.
Can I look back at this later? Is there?
Or I can.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, so that rate was set at that time, or I'm sorry, the property tax levy is what we really focus on during budget time. That's the dollars it takes to support the budget. And so this 29.359 rate, we apply it against the estimated value, and that gives us a tax levy. And that's what we use. But then in November, they have to back into the real rate based on the dollar amount we say we need. So they back into the rate that's going to be necessary to generate that amount of dollars. And so that's why you'll see for 2019, instead of it being that nice 29.359 number we keep talking about, it's a little bit higher, because after it was technically adjusted in November, it went up a bit so that we could have enough dollars that we need. So, but every year we reset that rate back to that 29.359 until we get to 2023, when that resolution tells us to reduce the rate to 28.758 mils. And the reason that year was targeted is because that's when we have a lot of debt service fall off for some of our major projects. And so the intent was, remember we talked about the same time the debt policy was changed, the intention was to reduce how much debt we would take on. And so it was thought that that debt service would fall off, and we wouldn't need to tax to support any more debt service. And so this rate was reduced to the amount we thought was necessary to support the operating budget without that debt service. So since then, we have changed the debt policy. We do have some debt funding that's coming back online, but this has not been adjusted to reflect that potential increased debt service that we'll have in those years. So does that kind of help frame the issue a little bit?
Yep.
Okay. So then, Commissioner Howell, if you want to maybe talk about the motivation.
Well, I don't have the mill levy numbers in front of me for all of the various years, but there was a time where the mill levy went up above 30, then came back down, and that type of thing. So we're trying to capture, I think, a point in our history. I think about around 2008-ish.
It was the 2010 tax year.
2010 tax year is what we had at that point was a 29.359 mill levy. And so that became a goal, trying to keep our mill levy equal with that. And the reason we would do that is because we obviously have a bigger economy. We have more people. We have more structures. We have higher property values. By trying to target that mill levy each year, we're trying to connect, if you will, the size and scope of government to the size of the local economy. That was the thought behind that. In the past, when people's evaluations go up rapidly, by keeping the mill levy equal, it would generate quite a lot more dollars. And then there's also times where the assessed valuation didn't go up very much, and then the electeds would probably be more inclined to increase the mill levy. But generally speaking, and again, I have this going all the way back to, I think, 1970, maybe a little bit before that. I'll just say back in before 1980, our mill levy in Sedgwick County was about 15. Okay. In 1982, our mill levy was right at 15. We generated $21 million in property tax that year, 1984, I think it was. And I think right now we're about double the mill levy and about almost six times more in property tax dollars. So this was an effort trying to simply connect the size and scope of government back to the economy. So the idea is if you have more people, you have more streets, you have more services you're delivering, if you connect it to the mill levy, then you should always have enough dollars to do the same level of services you've done in the past. You're not increasing, you're not decreasing, you're simply doing the same as you did before. Because the mill levy generates more dollars as the assessed valuation goes up. And that's the thought behind it. And in terms of 2023, we pay off some debt, and we're just trying to capture some of that obligation in a property tax reduction rather than allow ourselves to just spend the money again without some discussion. So,
And that was something that you voted in favor of doing?
absolutely. Yeah. I think generally speaking, Sedgwick County's been in favor of the tax lid. We have stood alone in the state level. Most of the commissioners in the past have been in favor of that. Doesn't mean we'll stay there, but that's where we've been in the past. The tax lid is not unique to Kansas. Many states have tax lids. We used to have a tax lid in Kansas before. It went away and it came back. And the idea is that if you have something that's so important that the people understand it, that you want to ask the people for permission essentially to grow the government, they could essentially vote to allow us to bust through that lid on a particular year. At least that way the people have the right to control the size and scope of their government. Otherwise, it's up to us to continue to live within our means and find ways to provide services for the dollars that static mill levy creates. And I think what the idea of passing a resolution that targets that same mill levy, it ignores the technical adjustment. Most years through...
What do you mean technical adjustment?
So we pass a dollar budget. We don't actually pass a mill levy. The county clerk calculates the mill levy that generates the dollars that we pass. So we say we need $440 million. He'll calculate a mill levy. To provide property tax funds, we need to make that budget work. And because June is when they give us our estimate, and then through the appeals process, assessed valuations typically will go, the entire jurisdiction's appraisal property values drops just a little bit because of the appeals that happen. And so if X times Y equals Z, and we have to have Z dollars, if X is property values, then Y is the mill levy, you have to increase one, because the other one went down, the other one has to go up to create the same dollars. And so there's a technical adjustment that happens. And most governing bodies will take the last year's technical adjusted mill levy as a basis for the next year's budget process. Whereas our resolution goes back to the target mill levy each year, so that we are always targeting and trying to ignore the technical adjustment that might happen, which is usually just a fraction of a mill. It's 0.1, 0.2 mils, whatever. It's usually pretty small. But that way it allows us to not let that thing creep up over time, because most jurisdictions over a period of years will add several mils to their property tax, not because they intended to, but the technical adjustment process actually creates that change over time. And so this was an effort trying to not let that happen and keep our government the same size and scope of what we've had in the past, unless we intentionally make it bigger. So.
And this was done in 2010, 2016.
Based
So
on
the
plan.
2016 commission projected what was going to happen in 2023. Seems like
So
we need to turn our ESP on, because I'm missing something here. Because the one thing that you didn't mention was the cost of inflation, the cost of doing business, technology services, those kinds of things. Because to me, yeah, we might have more people paying more dollars, but if you don't take into consideration every single bit of government, then how do you expect to pay for that?
So we have, correct me if I'm wrong, we have 8 sources of funding that create our budget. And of those, one of those is property tax, which is about 1/3 of our dollars altogether comes from property tax. And in 2015, the first year that I was here, I think our property tax collection that year, that year's budget, first year that I was here, I think we passed. At 29.359, I believe we had about $123 million in property tax. In the last 3 years, it's gone up over $20 million. So we've seen some extraordinary growth in our property tax revenues in the last 3 years, especially in 2018. I think we had a pretty big jump. Okay, it doesn't mean that we we can predict the future, but we certainly have the right to ask the people to understand and give us permission to blow through the cap, or we can find a way to make it work. But let me ask you a question, Lindsay. Even if we stayed at 29.359, what's that property tax collection at this year under the tax lid?
Well, the levy is 142.7 million, and in terms of expected projections, let me grab my notebook.
That's 2020 budget?
2019.
2019.
Actual year.
So 2019 is $142 million in property tax collections at 29.359. Of course, it was
That's the
technically
levy.
adjusted.
That's the levy. The
Right.
collections themselves we're projecting to be sorry, 137.5.
That's collected. But again, if you add in the subsequent years, it gets closer to 900. I'd like to continue to stress, we're very gracious on our property tax collections. We do collect nearly all of it over the period of 4 years. So I understand what you're saying. We're only going to collect 137 first year, but we're going to collect 142 million, or very close to that, by the end of the 4 years, because we collect about 99%, maybe a little more. There was
Yes.
remember I talked about that. So I understand that, but we've also, this year we're collecting the last 3 years worth of delinquent property tax with interest. So if you add all that up, again, on average, I like to just look at our projected number and say that's what we're planning to collect. We will collect that over time. Plus, we have an imbalance to get us through the years to help us, manage that delinquent tax. What's our projected property tax collection for 2020 with this budget? At 29.359.
141.7.
So it's not going up at all this year. It's actually going down.
Well, that's for the current property taxes.
Okay, so
So we had said we thought we would collect 137.5 this year. We're saying we would expect to collect 141.7 next year. And I don't have the actual levy in front of me.
okay.
Oh, wait.
So it's about roughly a $4 million increase. So leaving the mill levy where it is, we'll still have about a $4 million increase in our property tax funds, which is just, again, it's about 1/3 of our total revenue.
But we have $5 million in asks that we can't fund. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think that's why we have to prioritize, and we have to do, we have to make hard decisions to know what to do here. And I'm not so sure we can't do the 5.5 million. We haven't looked at that way yet. We haven't got a manager's recommended budget yet. So that's coming. Every single year, every elected official, I'm sure Commissioner Meister would agree with this, every single year, there's more asks and budgets are on the front end. Budgets don't work. You work with it and you find ways to solve those problems and you prioritize and you make it work. And if you simply have no restraint on taxes, you'll grow the budget really fast. So this is an effort trying to keep the size and scope of government equivalent with ourselves. What we've provided in the past, we can continue to provide in the future with the same mill levy. As our economy creates more dollars that we will use for services, because the economy is a little bit larger, we have more sheriff's officers, we have more services that are needed. We have $4 million more this year we had last year. That's what that $4 million is for. But if you increase the mill levy, then you'll actually get even more than that. So,
Well, I'm not saying increase the mill levy, but I'm just saying don't do something in the past for the future that when you don't take everything into consideration. So for me, it's like I would never say to a commission 5 years in the future, I'm gonna reduce it. I mean, that to me was kind of putting
for what it's worth, we have the right to vote to change this any way you want to. That commission in 2016 did not bind us today. We can vote to do whatever you want to do. Majority rules. So that's what they wanted to do in 2016. I voted for it. And I see the value in that principled policy. We can change it. There's nothing we did in 2016 that keeps us from doing what you want to do in 2019 or 2020. Right?
So what happens if we pass a budget that does not give us this deficit? We had a technical adjustment last year and didn't violate anything, right?
The technical adjustment did not.
Well, if we pass a budget that is balanced and we don't touch the mill levy, the technical adjustment will take care of that, won't it?
Well, not necessarily, because that technical adjustment just tries to generate enough revenue to cover what you wanted in your recommended budget. So if we need $130 million of a property tax levy, that technical adjustment is only going to step in to make up the difference that we lose between that estimate in June and what happens in November. It's just going to keep us whole. We don't benefit from that technical adjustment from June to November. It equalizes us. Otherwise, if the value dropped and we kept that target mill levy rate, we would actually get less revenue, which wouldn't be enough to support our budget that you all adopted in August.
Okay. So how did we get a technical adjustment in 2019 that put the mill levy at 29.383,
So
which is above 29.359?
Right. So that resolution that you all passed only gives staff direction to what we include in our, the adopted budget you approve, and then what we include in our forecast. So when you adopted the budget in August, you adopted it based on the value that the clerk gave us as of June 15th. As of November 1st, that number changes because of all of those Board of Tax Appeals, things that are happening, and people typically tend to appeal when their property's too high. And so what happens is the value goes down. And so in order for the real tax rate that's imposed in November that's sent out in those tax bills, they basically have to back into the tax levy that we want. So if we need $130 million, it would be really nice if we had a whiteboard in here. If we need $130 million, it's going to take X rate applied to this value to get that.
Right.
If that value goes down, the rate goes up to generate the same amount of money. So we have no ability to tell the clerk what to do, and so the clerk has to do the technical adjustment. And that's why we wind up with this 29.383, is because after you adopt the budget with that dollar amount in it, the clerk is going to figure out what the rate is necessary to generate that amount of dollars after we take into account all of those changes to value. And so every year we have changed. So we've had this rate in since the 2016 budget, and we tried to get 29.359. We got 29.383 with our technically adjusted rate. The next year we tried 29.359. The technically adjusted rate went up 29.393. The following year, by magic, we got the same technically adjusted rate, 29.393. And then this year we're back down to 29.383. Every year we've targeted 29.359 in your adopted budget, because the resolution is basically law that says we have to. But then the clerk is not bound by such things. He'll go in and technically adjust it, and this is the real rate that's imposed.
Okay. So you're saying on August 7th, make it real simple for me, on August 7th, if we pass a balanced budget, then we also have to have a resolution to change the mill levy?
It depends. So right now, we say that it's going to be $1.35 million in the forecast for a deficit. If you want that to be zero, unless we cut other stuff, we would have to get rid of that target mill levy rate resolution to generate revenue adequate to cover that $1.4 million. That would be necessary. Now, that's not to say that you can't adopt a budget that has a deficit in it. But that would be how we'd have to approach that. if that makes sense. You would have to change the resolution before we recommend a budget to you.
Okay, well, I'm not a big fan of deficit spending.
Right.
We have I look at our reserves out here as a rainy day fund. If 2008 happens again tomorrow, then we need something we can fall back on. We may have to deficit spend at that time, but we've got the money to do that. So it's like I've got a savings account at home for myself. If something happens, I can start drawing money out of that. To spend that money now, when the economy isn't in bad shape, or we're not downturn in the economy, it doesn't make much sense to me to have deficit spending.
Well, I think Tom knows that. He's not going to you're not going to present us a budget that's deficit spending.
No, we'll end up submitting to you.
I mean,
We'll discuss it.
Tom knows our feelings on that. I mean, you've been
But right
saying
now,
that
the
last-
budget shows 1.3 million.
I get that, but not the manager's recommended budget won't show that. I mean, you've been saying that every year since you've been here, and Tom understands that.
I know.
Where we
but
are.
What, he's gonna have to present us something that's got cuts.
Yeah.
Where do you want the cuts at?
I'm going to let him decide
You're-
that, and then I'll
you're making him take
then
the
I'll
heat?
say if it's good or not.
But I think that's incumbent upon us
It
as
is.
the
It is.
elected
I know. I'm
to say where the cuts ought to be.
A lot of these decision packages, I mean, they're all worthwhile causes, but that's why we have to know what will the wheels fall off the train if we do not give certain departments a certain amount of money. That's the question that I have. That's what I was really saying to Wes, and it was probably unfair to do that to him when we could have done that to everybody. Like, what's a make or break position? And that's kind of where Tom understands. I think Tom allowed everybody. The last few years, I think people were scared about asking for money because they were afraid certain personality might blow up on them, so they didn't do that. And now that the certain personality's not here, I don't think they were as concerned about it. That's what I understand from talking to department heads, that they felt more comfortable with coming and asking. That doesn't mean they're going to get it. In
And
fact,
I
I'm
think-
sure, Tom, you probably told them that, right?
Well, I was just talking with Lindsay. We can come back in a manager's recommended budget and recommend a deficit spend to you. We could.
Absolutely. There's no resolution that prohibits.
Oh, I know that. I just know you're not going to.
Well, and that would be something we'd want to talk with you about. I do know the feelings are that deficit spending is bad, but at the
Certainly.
same time, we have collected and accumulated a decent-sized fund balance in our county general fund. And we do have some one-time commitments to the zoo, so that under the county's fund balance policy, maybe that total $6 million of zoo funding would be an appropriate use under our fund balance policy. Now, would it show a deficit spend in that year? Yes. But otherwise, what we're doing is not allocating $2 million of resources to county departments for ongoing needs. And so to the extent you all want it as a policy consideration to consider up to some amount of deficit spending in the general fund as a policy decision, that would not be averse to other policies that we have as well. And that would be something we'd be interested to know if you do have any willingness to do that, because that would be a useful tool as we move forward to know whether that's something you'd even consider. Otherwise, that does.
Well, I think we discussed that back in the fall when we passed the $6 million for the zoo over the 3 years. Was that something a few years ago when the commission did? They took the $5 million for the elephant exhibit out of
Fund
the
balance.
reserves.
Right.
So that was a discussion that I know we had. I think you had intimated that we would probably have extra money in the next 3 years to do that. So I think it was based off of that decision we decided to spread it out over the next 3 years. But if we want to have a discussion, I'm completely open to the discussion of saying, let's take that money out of reserves. It's one of the reasons we have reserves. Prior commissions have that, there's been precedent that anything for the zoo capital improvements come out of reserves. So that's an absolute discussion we can have.
I think those are discussions we have over the next couple of weeks.
Right.
Oh yeah, I know. We don't have to make a decision on that today. I'm just for overall trajectory of this budget, not deficit spending. I think for me that's a requirement. And I know when Pete and I were at the city, that was something that we had, told Bob Layton too, that deficit spending is just not anything that we're comfortable with. So, thank you.
Commissioner Howe?
So the two caps that you were talking about, Mr. Manager, one of those is the retargeting of 29.359.
The reset.
My calculations show that this year, if you were to ignore that, rescind that policy, you would have about $117,000 more.
Yep.
So that's what we're talking about. No, so that doesn't solve your $1.35 million problem. Okay? So even if you wanted to rescind that policy, it doesn't solve that bigger issue. Okay?
You're only talking about the going from 28.758 to 29.359.
29.383 versus 29.359 is a 24 thousandths of a mil. That's $117,000,
That's correct.
today's dollars. So you have a $1.35 million, you have a problem you have figured out. And by the way, we hear the term, we're going to pass a balanced budget. We have a requirement to do so. August 7th, we'll pass a balanced budget. There's two terms that get used it confuses people. I'm going to state the obvious. I know it's everybody in here, but let's at least say it because it's important. We are obviously taking on some debt. Okay, so with the balanced budget, we are accepting some debt or some plan for debt, but we still pass a balanced budget, and we're planning to make bond service or debt service payments, bond and interest on our debt.
So we're not taking on as much as we had.
We'll talk about that as another topic, but my point is that your balanced budget can include debt.
Mm-hmm.
Second thing is deficit spending. It sounds really bad. Sounds like, well, you're spending through your savings accounts, but you even said, Lindsay, that some of our stuff, we have caps on some of our budget categories. We have caps, and some things we're doing intentional drawdowns. We save up money and we spend money. In fact, I would tell you in 2021, I guess it is, when we spend money on the admin building, if that's what happens, will that not show as a deficit spending? Because we've taken $3 million out of our savings account and spend that on that building. That would show as a deficit spending, will it not?
It wouldn't then, because we put the cash in to that fund at the end of 2018, and so to the extent we spend that $3 million, that cash is already sitting in that pot, so that would not reflect as deficit spending in that circumstance.
But there are times where we save up money over years for things, and money is earmarked, and then you spend that year you spend it shows up as deficit spending. It may be planned. So again, I think what we don't want to do is have a budget so that we're not drawing down balances thoughtfully. If we have a budget that has too much operations costs and it's recurring operations costs, that can be a problem. But as long as our operations are under control, I think especially the one-time money, if you spend money that you've saved up and use it one time, and that's there was an explanation as to why you deficit spended that 1 year, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's planned. And we have a thoughtful discussion and with planned expenditure, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But it sure sounds bad. Politically, it sounds like, well, you're not managing your money, but deficit spending may be okay as long as you plan it and it's not considered operations, but it's money you saved up for one-time things. So, doesn't the state limit us on how much money we can have in what we call a rainy day fund? We can't just save up.
Well, it doesn't so much call it as a rainy day fund, but what the state says is we can't carry forward more than 5% of our budgeted expenditures in our tax funds that's not allocated. And so that's why when I talked about increasing the contingencies, that's why we're increasing the budget authority in those contingencies, because it allocates that money and it helps us stay within that 5% restriction, because we do continue to add fund balance to our
My point is, if 2010 were to come back, 2009 were to come back, we can't necessarily have such a nest egg. We would be able to get through that with savings. We're going to be limited in what we can do.
Right.
Getting ready for that.
Right. So what we did when we
difficult day.
experienced that from 2011 through 2013 is we did phased years of reductions because we had to cut $20 million out of the operating budget. So we did that over 3 years. We knew we were going to use some of that rainy day balance for that, and that was okay under policy.
Okay. I may have some other comments, but I'll stop for now. Thank you.
So the reset to the mill levy for next year is right. It's 117,000. But there's the second component of that is the reset in 2023. And Lindsay, could you talk about what those dollars would look like?
Sure. So when we go from the 29.359 mils to 28.758 mils, that's a reduction of 0.6. and that equates to $3.26 million, and that will be a compounding in 2023, and that will be a recurring loss in the years thereafter, because that resolution does set it at 28.758 mils for 2023 and beyond. There's no other adjustments in those outer years.
Even if you were to rescind that, though, that won't affect this year's budget. That's a future
Correct.
decision, right? So we have actually several years to talk about that. Not to surprise anybody in the room, but I'm willing to talk about that if it's used for certain things, like infrastructure. I think that storm water is one of those things where we have no plan to solve this problem. We have a 500, is that right? Is that the right? $500 million known problem. There may be other problems out there, but say we have $500 million problem. And this year we're putting in $500,000 into the big ditch and no other money for stormwater, stream maintenance, which is a fairly small amount of money overall. So in terms of infrastructure, upstream management of stormwater, we don't have any budget set aside. And if you talk about government tax dollars used for infrastructure, that's a great topic. That's how we end up with roads and bridges in the first place, is we invest in our infrastructure with tax dollars, and people do support that. So if you were talking about taking that $3.5 million in 2023 and using it for stormwater infrastructure, I would be interested in having that discussion. But just to put it in the budget and spend it like everything else, I'm not sure I could support that. So
I think that begs the question, though, what is our priority as a commission? Is our priority as a commission only to create roads and bridges? I mean, we are the Board of Public Health. At what point do we not remember that? That's my question. I mean, to me, if we have 3 suicides in 1 week, with 3 suicides in 3 days, what is our Board of Public Health doing about that? I hate to keep harping this, but that's important. Roads and bridges, yes, they're important. I'm not saying they're not. But if that's the only thing this commission ever focuses on, how do we solve the problem of kids killing themselves? That's my question to you. And, I get it, you're passionate about stormwater, but dang it, stormwater isn't killing our kids. They are killing themselves. So you can smile over there all you like, but this is a serious problem that needs to be addressed. And if nobody's going to talk about it, I will.
Well, we've recognized that we do have a behavioral health problem. We've talked about it numerous times. I don't know that we've got the solution yet. Hopefully, if we can get our new coordinators in here to talk to us, maybe we can figure out where we're going. But right now, I don't know where we're going because we haven't heard from our coordinators to tell us what their recommendations are. So I think that's important that we figure out what, first of all, I think just if you look at what our legislative priorities were last year, behavioral health was our top priority. And so I don't know that should change in our budget. If that was our top priority for the state legislature, it ought to be our top priority for us too. Mm-hmm. Our next priority was transportation. And I don't know that that's going to change. We have to have the infrastructure for our citizens. Our next priority was workforce development, and that's going to help for economic development. I'm not sure that we have anything in our budget for workforce development right now other than GWP to fund economic development, but that still has to be one of our areas that we put our funding in. So I think if we're going to say that those were our priorities for the state, then they probably ought to be our priorities for us too.
I'd like to respond to the previous comment. Again, I'm not smiling because of suicide or mental health. I'm very invested in that, and I care very deeply about that topic. We have a very complicated budget. We just spent the last 5 days listening from how many agencies? 40 different agencies, roughly. We have a very robust budget, very complicated, with a lot of tremendous, great people. We provide excellent services, quality of life, education, treatment programs. We take care of our kids. We take care of the adult corrections. We do public safety. We do medical services. We do all kinds of wonderful things. And it's hard to pinpoint any one thing in the budget, so this is the most important thing. It's all important. And that's what you call a balanced budget, because it takes care of literally 40 to 45 different agencies in a very balanced way. And they're all, we could spend more money everywhere if we had the money. That's why North Junction is very important. I have no doubt. It is important, less important than suicides and mental health. That's not a good question I wouldn't even want to ask, because there's no comparison that they're both critically important, and they are. You can't say anything we do is not important. It's all important. But if we had unlimited resources, I'm not sure you can solve some of these problems. And I think we should do what we can with what we have. We're limited, though. But it doesn't mean that seniors are not important. And as you know, Commissioner Cruz, I'm very passionate about this program. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get what I want this year, because I'm just one commissioner. And I'm okay with that. But I'm going to advocate politely and respectfully and professionally for what I think is right. But I'm not going to get all things I want. I'm sure that's true. And it doesn't mean that seniors are the most important or they're not important. It just means that I want to advocate for them. And if we had more resources, we could do some amazing things. But I'll tell you this. I don't know how many millions of dollars of requests we haven't even seen. We see about $5.5 million here. Mr. Manager, how many millions of dollars have we not seen that came to you?
About that again.
So you've already taken care of about half of those requests, and I'm sure that those things were all important. If we had unlimited supply, unlimited resources, we could do a lot more in this game. But that's not reality. We have to live within our means, and that's why we have these difficult decisions we have to make. I love your passion for mental health and substance abuse treatments, and I agree with you on that. But it doesn't mean I don't care. I do greatly care, but this is not picking one thing out of 45 agencies and saying that's the most important thing. It's all critically important, and that's why the balanced budget is so difficult for policymakers. But that's what we're elected to do. Thank you.
I would like Lindsay just to finish back to this mill levy cap, to take us through the budget years. And Commissioner Howell's correct that if we would undo the reset to the cap, it's about $117,000 for the 2020 budget year. And Lindsay has kind of talked about what happens in 2023 when we do the reset to 28.3, whatever that number is, the 28 number. But I would like her to step us through this year by year, because the only thing that is time sensitive is if we want to amend that, it has to be done before the manager's budget comes in. If we don't want to do anything with that, I'm fine. But we just need clarity soon on that. So can you step us through what that means as far as total dollars?
So Tom had kind of asked for some context for this a while back, so we put together a sheet, and I'm happy to share it with you after this. But basically, the idea is if we had not reduced the target rate, if we had continued with kind of like what the city of Wichita does, as to your point earlier, most jurisdictions do use the technically adjusted rate because that is what was necessary to generate the dollars to support your budget. So if we had not done that, when the year that was implemented was 2016. The year before, that rate after technical adjustments and everything else was 29.478 mils. So the next year we went from 29.478 to 29.359. If we had not done that from 2016 through 2019, just based on the minimum technical adjustments we actually experienced, we would have been at a point now to where we would have collected a total of $2.8 million more over that 4-year period than where we are today. And so obviously that number gets a little bit bigger each year just because of incremental growth. But that first year we would have seen about $520,000 more dollars in property tax revenues. The following year, $600,000. The following year, $725,000. The following year, $925,000. That would have been without a tax increase, and that would have been some additional revenue that would have been seen at the county. And so that is why I think I see your point to get it down to 29.359. I think on the flip side, without a tax increase, you do generate this additional revenue for programs.
Let's define what you just said, though, without a tax increase.
Right.
The mill levy didn't go up each of those 4 years. Had you not made the readjustment back to 29.359, the mill levy would have incrementally gone up 4 times.
It would have, because of that technical adjustment. That was what was necessary
Right.
to generate the dollars.
And so by definition, what we're trying to say is that by some people is a tax increase, because the mill levy is larger after 4 technical adjustments. Mill levy is larger than it would be if you didn't reset that. And that those 4 technical adjustments collectively are probably about a quarter of a mil. I can add it up right now, but you know, it's about a quarter of a mil. So we have a quarter of a mil tax increase we didn't have because that policy was in place.
I just want to make sure we understood the numbers.
Yeah.
Lindsay, tell me, remind me, and again, what is 1 mil impact per property on a residential property? Is it
It'd be-
$11 or something?
Yes. So basically, we have 11% assessment rate
About $11 per 100,000.
per 100,000, right? And so,
So this quarter mil that we've saved taxpayers a quarter of $11.
well, and so we actually, Tom had me put that
$3.
information together
Yep.
as well. That 29.478 is the number we just talked about, which is where we were just before this got implemented. And a $100,000 homeowner would have paid $589.56 on that, as opposed to the 29.359, which is $587.18. So that's about $2.40 for a $100,000 homeowner per year.
Right. And I know that it does get debated, the definition of, you know, I know at the city, Wichita has not voted to increase their mill levy since 1985.
I thought it was 94.
94?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Ask Elma Broadfoot. She lost
let's call it
because of it.
Let's call it a long time.
Yeah. That's what Bob Knight won in 95.
So, but the rules of technical adjustments within the state and the accounting practices has been in effect, I believe, at the city since then. So it's debated that, you know, at any time, city council or county commission can raise or lower their mill levy. I kind of, going back historically as well at the Sedgwick County, the commission chose to raise a mill levy to build what was driven hugely by, at the time, I think, knowing historically the principles of the aviation industries, that the county could get this done to basically save our city and our region with the aviation. Training was have to have. And I think it's courageous that the county commission at that time voted to increase the mill levy 2 mills, I think, or something like that.
It was 2.5 for that plus.
2.5 mills for how many years? And then it came back down after
Right,
that project
It was
was.
incrementally reduced because.
Then it was. So, for historical purposes, Lacey, for you and I, it's kind of a. You know, you can choose to be one way or another on A, raising the mill or lowering the mill, or B, what I would consider fairly normal times like we're in now, acknowledge a technical adjustment that's impacts about, well, and like I said, in 4 years it impacted $2.50 on a $100,000 home. So by 1 year it's probably 75 cents per 100,000.
Oh, that was just per year. The $2 was
$2.50
per year.
$2.50 per year. Okay. Yeah, so it ended up being about $8 or something. Is that $9 over 4 years? Right. But I'm just trying to help put this all in perspective.
That also compounds though, right?
Yes.
So it's, anyway.
One of the pieces of information I passed out the other day was where Sedgwick County falls based on all the other counties. Is there any way that we can get something like that that also compares all of the cities in Sedgwick County and the school districts in Sedgwick County, over the last 5 years?
I can sure ask.
I think Linda has that.
Okay. And you're just wanting the values and the tax rates and those kinds of things?
Yeah, the mill
Values,
levies.
Tax rates, levy rates, okay.
If I knew what the mill levies were for each of the cities,
Oh, yeah, oh, that's easy, okay.
the mill levy for each of the school districts, and I don't think we need to get down to townships and water districts and things like that, just the major taxing authorities here
But
in
you want the
Sedgwick
second
County.
and third class cities, the small cities as well, right? Not just city with.
Yeah, I'd be interested
Okay.
in things like Goddard, Hayesville, Genie.
Okay. We can do that.
And on the, and we can beat it to death a little bit, but on the tax lid around that the state passed, I still think it was irresponsible that the state didn't include themselves under the same rules, and they exempted school districts. So to me, you were there. It was clearly a penalty aimed at counties and municipalities, and not anybody else, not cemeteries, not anybody else. It was aimed at the perception that cities and counties are raising property taxes all the time.
Well, for the record, the state hasn't changed its property tax collection in decades. It's 21.5 mils, 20 that is for schools, 1.5 is for general fund, and it's been that way for as long as I've been alive, I think.
Do they take their technical adjustment?
It's always, no, they do not. It's always 21.5 mils. But this technical adjustment is a county, is a county policy, it's not a tax lid policy. Tax lid is that if you want to raise revenue,
I know.
okay.
It's, yeah, you vote.
So anyway,
send it to
anyways,
people to vote.
And I wasn't there when it passed, but we were there to fix it the following year. And we led on that, trying to change the dates to make that possible. But the reality is, the tax lid is focused at property taxes, and the state hasn't changed its property tax collection rate at 21.5 mils. It's been that way since I think I've been alive. Very long time.
On my property tax bill, isn't there 2 points towards the state?
It's 1.5 mils for state general fund,
Certainly.
and
So
20
that
mils for school.
that 1.5,
It's been that way forever.
right. So then the evaluation goes up on your property. They get 1.5 of that new valuation, correct? So the state is capturing the increase in value,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
But they penalize the cities and the counties for trying to accept that, for wanting to accept that.
I don't think we've had a problem with trying. We've not been forced to lower our mill levy to stay under the cap. That hasn't happened.
Well, we only had it for 2 years, but yes, that's true.
Maybe it's conceivable that it might happen someday, but it hasn't happened. In other words, the calculated growth, the exceptions in the tax lid are greater than the dollars the increase in dollars that would have created by keeping the same mill levy. So I see your point, though.
Okay, right. Well, and if we get hit, like I'm on a couple of boards, and this is budget times for those boards as well, one for-profit and a couple non-profit, and one of them got hit based on performance on their medical claims and jumps through the roof for this year, for this coming year. They got to make an adjustment. If we, as the county, 3,000 employees, if we get hit with a really drastic rate increase, which can happen, then it's clearly either suffers for services or we accept things like a technical adjustment or whatever to try to accommodate. But many things are not considered in trying to freeze this, and I think 2023 is predicting a mill levy in 2023 is a little bit irresponsible, actually, knowing that you can't look in a mirror in 2016 and say this is what's going to be the world in 2023. From my opinion, maybe you can. If you can, I'd like to go to Vegas with you sometime.
Right?
But you probably don't gamble. I do.
Well, that year, leaving the mill levy where it's been, 29.359. If you use that number going forward, after 2023, you're going to have about $3.5 million more that following year. And it doesn't say we have a way to spend it, but right now that's not defined what that would be. So,
Yeah.
you're right. Again, as I said before, anything we passed in 2016 can be rescinded. If there's a majority of commissioners want to change that to something else, we can do it. That's the problem. Tax lid allows us to change it back. Certainly.
Will it be somewhat hypocritical if what you mentioned earlier, you'd like to raise the senior services dedicated mills to a half when you're arguing
Well,
the
I
other
mean,
way on the other
so
side?
getting into that, so we, back in 1984, we raised the mill levy by 3.7 mills in Sedgwick County. It was 15. It went to 18.7 the following year. And we hit record low mill levy support for senior programs last year, and the population for seniors doubled over that same period of
I
time.
understand it. There's two of us.
I would tell you that the ballot question says we should pass.
I said two of us.
Technically, I'm a senior too, but
You are?
I am now. I'm 55, so
That's not the same.
Boy, Michael, we're
I'm getting a senior discount, so it counts. But anyway, arguably the county did increase its mill levy, and it's been embedded in our total mill levy collection ever since 1984. But we've found other priorities, and that money's been used for other purposes. And it was as high as 0.9, or just below 0.9. This last year it was 0.42. So if we were to simply go to 0.5, which is just a little bit more, right now I think you said 0.46 this year, roughly, something. If we targeted 0.5 and handed that much budget over to the Aging Advisory Board, they would come back with recommendations on how to best spend that money. We just have to approve that. But it gets the politics out of this. I think right now, one thing I don't like about this is tiring debate of whether we should or should not fund certain programs within the Department of Aging. I'm tired of that. I don't feel that we should be doing that. I'd like to see the Aging Advisory Board empowered to come back with recommendations that really mean something to us. And half a mil provides enough money for them to do whatever they need to do, and then some.
Well, if we had $3 million extra in 2023, maybe we could put more services to seniors.
Yeah, you're right.
Then $3 million didn't sound so bad, huh?
Are we helping you on anything?
Is this helpful?
Just listening. I think for today, that's a good conversation. I think we can talk with you between now and June 19th and maybe get some clarity on, and actually it'll have to be faster than that, because if we're going to take any action on
It has
this,
to be done by then.
it would have to be in a formal meeting publicly. So we'll be talking with you over the next couple weeks about this particular topic and about general budget information between now and June 19th. So I think we're good, unless you guys have anything else you want to talk about, or the staff has anything that they want to discuss. I think we're good
Any
for
of the
today.
commissioners have anything else they'd like to discuss today? I don't see anything else from the commissioners.
Nope. Thank you, everybody.
First of all, thank you for all the staff for everything they did. You got tons. This whole book is full of stuff that you all provided us. Now we have to digest it and figure out what we're going to do from this point forward. But thanks to the staff for coming up with both of these binders, actually, full of information. We appreciate it. And all the department heads been in the meetings each day. We sincerely appreciate and all the assistant county managers. Thanks for all the hard work on this. Now the big tour starts. Thanks.